I'd like to share with you my chapter from the recent Oxford India Studies in Contemporary Society Sexuality Study edited by Sanjay Srivastava. My chapter, Chapter 9, Queering Subjectivities on the Praxis of Outing Gender, Race, Caste, and Class in Ethnographic Fieldwork. The fragments of Suresh's biography brought together in this chapter contour a particular and contemporary intersection of modernity and tradition at one axis, and social media and travel at another. Forming new identities and kin, this marks the personal and political in relation to popular culture and public discourse. Unlike other interlocutors analyzed in this broader ethnography of men who have sex with men, MSM, in urban India, Suresh's life is unmended and uncoordinated, his identities compartmentalized, leaving him unsettled and unsatisfied with the sum of the pieces. Where others, including myself, have used the same social media to circumvent conventional, localized social hierarchies, Suresh's story reflects the trauma of shifting subjectivities. Looking back, Suresh, at a young age of 27, recalls that he once used to be so naive. In June 2009, Suresh registered his explicitly erotic profile on a gay cruising website. 6 days later, he met a Singapore-based European businessman in his late 40s. The executive regularly flew business class to Delhi. The two men quickly became lovers. Visiting the European man at the five-star hotel where he lodged in Delhi, this executive had to escort Suresh inside since the gatekeepers of the hotel's class structure, for example, the door attendants, lobby staff, urban elite patrons, and imposing facades, all marked him as out of place. They treated Suresh accordingly. Suresh initially had to coach himself into approaching the hotel, insisting that the executive meet him outside. Just a few years earlier, Suresh delivered laundry and fresh ironing to his parents' shop. His parents' thatch-roofed ironing stand sat adjacent to the apartment I had rented near Delhi University's North Campus when I initially began my research studies. His elder brother was already a married soldier, and his younger brother pursuing a trade certification course. It was Suresh's turn to grow up. I watched his life unfold for years, slowly realizing how his own narrative reflected specific intersections of gender, race, caste, and class that enriched his own pedagogic growth, mine, as well as studies of culture and modernity. In space and time, aspects of the interlocutors' lives echo the broader queer community's symphonic shift from margin to center. The solidarity built through at least two struggles marked this shift: combating HIV/AIDS stigma and discrimination since the mid-1990s, and then decriminalizing homosexuality in July 2009. The Delhi High Court victory rally took place at Jantar Mantar in the heart of the capital, the foot of the annual Pride March, the second of which was held only days earlier. Interviews with Suresh began in 2007 when he explained that his identity had shifted from normal to gay, years after he began actively seeking men for sex. Over the next few years, Suresh visited me periodically at my home, which evolved into 3 recorded interviews, including one in June 2010, when he explained that he had begun work as a pornographic actor. Suresh follows the mainstream Bollywood filming culture, which concomitantly shifted from invisibility to visibility. The violent storms that met the debut of the film Fire in 1996 due to its depictions of lesbian love and desire had ceased to mainstream releases such as My Brother Nikhil in 2005 and the 2008 blockbuster Dostana, a slapstick comedy of mistaken gay identity starring 3 Bollywood icons, and there were actually only like 2 or 3 actual gay characters in the whole film. In June 2007, Sanjeev, another interlocutor, Sanjeev's employer included us all in a small team to research grassroots gender-based violence interventions. As he and I sat in a private meeting space in his workspace to review the preliminary field interview guide, our open and honest discussion resulted in an impromptu interview. I was fortunate to have carried along the ethnographic fieldwork toolkit. writing recording devices, flexibility, and a critical research frame. Excuse me. Follow-up conversations with Sanjeev took place in 2009 by phone, shortly after his move to South Africa. Contemporaneously, mainstream news dailies, hardbacks, and glossies in India shifted from AIDS pathology towards inclusion and self-representation for gay and lesbian people. This parallels Sanjeev's personal and professional shift from alienation to solidarity. What's more, this representation here of Sanjeev and Suresh's coming out sits at a critical junction of the contemporary research methodologies of Radhika Chopra and bell hooks, intersectionalities. And I attribute these two researchers as sort of seminal of my own PhD. Radhika Chopra was my supervisor, and bell hooks sort of planted the idea in a speech she gave. Shifting and discontents. And discontents is riffing off of another professor at Delhi University, Meenakshi Tapan, who writes about women's bodies and discontents in modernity. Working as a domestic servant for foreigners afforded Suresh a safe space that he had otherwise not even conceived existed, let alone for himself. His consistent exposure to foreigners in this intimate space catalyzed his discontent with his existing place within the localized hierarchy due to his, as he says, the way foreigners speak to me, not like this, stretching his hand out flat, pressing his palm down as if gently subduing a surging pressure. Sponsored by his lover, Suresh traveled abroad nearly fortnightly over the next few months. His travels raised suspicions with the Delhi police, who dispatched officers to Suresh's place of employment from the local precinct where the foreigners had registered him as a domestic servant. The police interrogated and informed the elderly landlady about Suresh's travels, sharing the detail of each date of entry and exit from India over the course of the previous 8 months. Suresh's status denied him privacy. The police investigation intimidated the landlady. She was a widow living alone with her maid, servant, and daytime driver who spent most of his hours hanging out with other drivers by the ironing booth at the end of the street. The elderly widow acted suspiciously towards anyone entering the building. She enthusiastically hushed any commotion and fiercely quelled neighbors' gossips. She rejected the idea that a domestic servant could afford to travel abroad, nor would she accept that a friend would so willingly, consistently sponsor trips without any illicit undertakings. She had warned the foreigners that they treated their staff too well and passed on neighbors' cautions to meet delivery boys at the gate and not allow them to enter the flat. The foreigners were spoiling the neighborhood's balance of status that had been so carefully crafted. The elderly landlady immediately banished Suresh from the building, effectively firing him from the job he had held for over 5 years. In the meantime, he had sold the school bus he had bought with his savings, but was still unsure about moving in with his lover for fear of the consequences of this dependence. For example, his lack of transferable skills in Singapore and his poor English all raised his anxieties. It's the falling in love that's making me high. It's the being in love that makes me cry. Shimmers Michael Jackson in his strong, high tenor, reminding me of the fine knitting of discursive voices facing Suresh. I'm scared, Suresh confided hours before leaving his first trip, his first flight abroad, and his first time in an airplane. What can I ask him for? I mean, say for example, I like to eat this and he likes something different. Can I say, like, this thing, I like this thing, you know what I mean? I did know what he meant and understood his anxieties over the status accorded through difference. I tried to imagine Suresh's internal hurdles in decolonizing the mind as Paulo Freire reportedly laid out, followed by radical feminist bell hooks, who writes extensively about Paulo Freire's work. Suresh's decolonization would entail unlearning domination and letting go of patterns of thoughts and behavior that prevent us from being self-determining, writes bell hooks. Mirroring Suresh's internal sense of competition and ultimate disembodiment, The metrosexual discussion in the sections that follow uses bell hooks' theories on the post-colonial habitus to examine the role of consumer iconography in catalyzing interclass cannibalism. When Suresh began working as a domestic servant for the foreign gay couple, he spoke virtually no English and yet became conversant and literate within 3 years of service without any formal training. He had only reached the 10th standard in school, though his brother had completed high school and a course in air conditioning repair. Despite being the more extroverted, their parents had considered Suresh to be the runt, and so had consistently hesitated to support his education. Had this anything to do with Suresh being the darkest? They were pleased when Suresh, their eldest son, remaining in the traditional multi-generational household, found steady employment in any capacity beyond what they could supply. By the time Suresh returned from his first lengthy stay in Singapore, he had streaked, straightened, and chopped his curly locks into a modern, chunky, unconstructed coiffure. His designer jeans, jacket, fashion spectacles, chic goatee, and elf-toed white suede shoes made him unrecognizable. When Suresh first moved to South Delhi, he would bathe with soap, irregularly apply body lotion, and occasionally buy a 2-rupee package of coconut oil for his hair. Initially, he had only added a heavy dousing of aerosol perfume spray from the local chemist. Now, in addition to a complicated teeth-bleaching contraption to brighten his beetle-stained smile, Suresh's European lover gifted him a few designer scents. Suresh insisted on buying his own clothes, and he initially paid the bill in the 5-star hotels in which they dined. I gathered that both he and his lover harbored anxieties around the transferal of gifts due to their symbolic nature and reinforcing their class disparity, thereby attempting to avoid hierarchy between the two. And Gloria Raheja talks about that. Becoming a dependent of another man was a sensitive matter for him. This tension discouraged ostentatious gifts. Besides, Suresh would have no explanation to offer his family for any expensive charms. The transferal of gifts and demonstrations of power through commercial exchanges, exacerbated by internet access, seemed to facilitate the commodification aspects of Suresh's relationship with his lover, allowing them both to construct identities wholly separate from their tactile realities at home. For Suresh, access to contemporary modern patterns of consumption signified his modernity and break from his roots at home. Recalling Bell Hook's reading of the commodification of the black male body through consumerism, Suresh's, quote, dreaded non-elite body is transfigured into the desired body. She writes about that in We Real Cool. This discussion looks at shifting corporeal subjectivities through transfiguration, highlighting nuanced distinctions between doing drag, transvestism, versus androgyny or any more genuine cross-gender dialogue. Through ostentatious consumption, Suresh sought metrosexuality in an attempt to personify contemporary urbanity as a means of liberation from the old social hierarchies around caste, class, and gender. The next section explores metrosexual iconography, foregrounding Suresh's own journey through its potentiality of transcending identities. Akin to the search for transcendence through real and virtual travel, evident in early queer journals such as J.R. Ackerley's 1932 Hindu Holiday and Indian Journal, Suresh uncovered dissimulation and the true meaning of loss and isolation. Ackerley, in fact, remained silent through his narrative concerning shifts in his own queer subject positionality, and wound up reinstantiating rather than transcending the globalizing terms of hegemonic power. So the comparison I'm making here between Suresh's own sort of journeys abroad as a gay man, almost a century later, 80, 90 years later from J.R. Ackerley being this gay traveler abroad, is that Suresh was only able to transcend the poverty which sort of kept him locked physically in place, and also very metaphorically within his own social class and caste background through the use of social media. That was the real hurdle, the platform for him. He met foreigners, which opened up this world of literacy to him, but then it's that internet literacy which literally allowed him to travel the world. J.R. Ackerley, being a man of a little bit class privilege, being a white person, and being from the imperial power, could go to India and travel and meet other men, have sex with men, and keep that quiet. Both in Hindu holiday, there's no explicit reference to his gay identity, but there is explicit reference to homoeroticism, and from what we know beyond that, J.R. Ackerley was in fact a man who had sex with men. And so just looking at how different the lives are across these decades, but also across social class and social difference, and looking at two different sides of the Raj, as it were. The article that I wrote in this book goes on and talks about metrosexuals and glossy ladies, modern heteronormative subjectivities. And so it looks at the background, the popular culture that sits at the backdrop of what and how Suresh is able to transform himself into this chunky, coiffy, white suede shoe wearing chocolate brother. So enjoy the next section.